Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first day of FCI Live 2025, our online series conference for startup food co-ops. This is our second session of the day in a highly requested topic, shared use kitchens in co-op projects. And we have Chris Dilley of Food Co-op Initiative and Lucy Dilley of Can-Do Kalamazoo with us, who have actually successfully made a shared use kitchen part of a food co-op project. And they're going to talk to you about the ins and outs of that, as so many of you have requested. Before we do that, I'm going to turn over to them in just a minute, but I wanted to thank our FCI Live champion sponsors. We're really excited to have National Co-op Grocers, Dot Co-op, and Colluminate all as our champion sponsors, making this series and this session possible. Thanks so much to them. So we're going to get started with our shared use kitchen co-op project session. And as I said, I'm trying to get this out. We have with us today Chris Dilley and Lucy Dilley. They'll explain that one in a minute. And they made a shared use kitchen happen successfully at PFC Food Co-op in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's actually been successful for many years. So we're going to learn the good, the bad, the ugly, because so many startups want to do this as part of their mission, understandably. And there's a reason probably why they're the only food co-op that I know of that actually is running a shared use kitchen. But they're going to tell us all about it. So thank you so much for being here, Chris and Lucy.
Yeah, thanks, JQ. As JQ mentioned, my name's Chris Dilley, and I'm the new Director of Startup Support for FCI. And though I'm new to FCI, definitely not new to the food co-op world. I spent over 2 decades managing retail food co-ops, mainly here in Kalamazoo. I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, at PFC Kalamazoo, and then also at three other co-ops for short periods as a manager on contract, independent contractor through Colluminate. I was in Springfield, Vermont, Detroit People's Food Co-op, and Gem City Market in Dayton, Ohio. Three of the four projects that I have worked as part of had a shared use kitchen in some way or another. So have some background there to share about that. So Gem City Market was built in 2020 with a teaching kitchen as part of it, one of its community spaces. Detroit PFC, part of a bigger development, the Detroit Food Commons, within which Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network operates a shared use kitchen. And then, of course, here in Kalamazoo, which we'll talk about a fair amount, an expansion relocation project, which I managed from concept to operation, included a combined PFC deli and shared use incubator kitchen in partnership with Can-Do Kalamazoo. And so I'm here today with Lucy Dilley, founder and executive director of Can-Do Kalamazoo.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, JQ. Um, like Chris said, we're married. Just get that out there right now.
Just
Chris
put
and I
that
are
out there.
married. And um, I have been involved in the local food system and entrepreneur ecosystem development for about 20 years. I created or developed several nonprofit programs in the food systems area. One of those was called Can-Do Kitchen, which started in 2007 as a shared kitchen for people to legally prepare foods to supply the demand for locally made foods. At that time, there was not a cottage food law in Michigan. There is in most states now. So having a license in a commercial kitchen was absolutely necessary to actually get your food products out there. I started Can-Do Kitchen in a 20-foot trailer that was kind of like a pared back food truck, but it was kind of before food trucks really were a thing, at least in the Midwest. As I got this program running, I realized that what we actually were doing was business incubation. And so from there, I came up with ways to support food entrepreneurs as they went from business ideas to launching those to growing those businesses. We developed workshops and one-on-one business counseling. We made retail connections for people. We had scholarships and a bunch of other things that helped them with their businesses. We moved to a church kitchen and then to the PFC kitchen and then to a catering kitchen. And in 2015, Can-Do Kitchen separated from our parent nonprofit. We formed a board of directors and we gained our tax exemption status. Our staff team grew and our clients increased, and we got more involved with other entrepreneur resource partners. And because of that, in 2022, we expanded our scope to include supporting any business type in addition to food businesses. So that took us from Can-Do Kitchen to our current name of Can-Do Kalamazoo. And since then, we've been developing an entrepreneur hub and our kitchen incubator. We moved into a new facility last year that has a lot more kitchen spaces, a conference room, which I'm happily sitting in right now, offices, co-working, and more space for my 7 employees. That's a little bit about me and Can-Do Kalamazoo.
Thanks, Lucy. So today what we're going to cover, and we already have covered who we are, we're also going to cover unpacking what shared use kitchen is, can mean. There's lots of different things that can mean. So we want to talk about what the possibilities are there, and then go into some detail about what each of those things means in terms of the work and how we actually accomplish that and what's involved in that. And then some examples. And then we'll open it up for questions and conversation after that. Um, so yeah, Lucy, you want to take on the what it is?
So we wanted to talk about what shared kitchen, it means different things in different contexts, but for the purpose of our conversation today, we wanted to actually define some different types of shared kitchens. And the reason why we're talking about this first is that depending on what your main goal is for having a kitchen in your co-op, that's going to determine like the space that you need and the programming and everything. So we're talking about programming first because that kind of sets the course for what you would do next. There are definitely some cases where a kitchen might incorporate several of these types of things, but there's still going to be one main use, one main reason why a co-op decides to go down the path of a kitchen in their facility. So we'll take the most general one first, a shared use kitchen. This is really a commercial kitchen that will have multiple tenants or subtenants. They often use the space at different times, or some of them have different spaces built into the facility to allow for them to be there at the same time, but have separate workstations. That's a key here. This can be a good step for if a food business graduates from an incubator kitchen where they need more space and more time. A lot of times it's owned by one of the producers that wants their own location, but realizes that overhead is a lot and they really want other tenants to be in there to help them absorb those costs. And in shared kitchens, the tenants do not get any business support from the landlord. A teaching kitchen, I'm assuming that this is not a demonstration kitchen that we're talking about, but rather like a hands-on cooking class type kitchen, which I think is more fun anyway. It'll have multiple prep or cooking stations, all with like that easy visibility to the teacher. It usually incorporates like home size stoves and equipment so that students can take what they learned in the class and do it at home. It can also be helpful to have youth-sized implements and ways for younger people to be involved safely. And licensing typically is not needed for cooking classes because usually you eat the food that you make. So that is considered private. A production kitchen is a commercial kitchen that's large enough to accommodate maybe some specialized equipment that allows a producer to kind of automate or get semi-automated with their processes because they've figured out that they need those scalability. It's usually built to the needs of one producer or will allow equipment to easily be moved in and out depending on what a producer needs. It'll have a good delivery area and lots of storage, lots of storage. Businesses that can utilize this type of kitchen are usually well established and have several employees using the space. And again, this tenant does not receive any business support from the landlord. And actually, sometimes they even are the owner of the building. Another one that's pretty common is a soup kitchen type model. This could actually look really similar to a shared use kitchen or a production kitchen, except that its purpose is to provide usually free food for folks that need that. The daily volume of food that you would want to produce is going to determine the size of the equipment that you need in that space. The financial model will probably rely solely on monetary donations or in-kind donations and probably volunteer labor. A license will be needed for this because the food would be served to the public, and that's where it gets into licensing is when you serve it to the public. I threw in a ghost kitchen here, Chris. I didn't tell you I was going to do that because it's trendy and I wanted to bring it up. These are really big facilities that typically have like multiple, like distinct cooking areas that a restaurant or another kind of what we call a ready-to-eat food business would work out of. There is no seating. They use technology. I mean, everybody does, but they really rely on it to get their food out to their customers in that delivery model. And I've seen they tend to exist in large metropolitan areas. So some of you might have these kitchens in your areas. We don't here in Kalamazoo. I don't think we're quite big enough. Um, an incubator kitchen is a commercial kitchen that has multiple areas for new producers who are trying out their business ideas. The rates are usually lower than market rate to allow for them to start, and sometimes those rates will then gradually increase. Um, an incubator is going to have some sort of structured business guidance and support that helps those food businesses grow and actually graduate. So the goal is that they graduate into their own kitchen, like a shared kitchen or production kitchen or a restaurant. Um, some incubators have application processes and or have memberships. Some incubators also have anchor tenants. We did that for a little while with the co-op. And all of them are going to have a scheduling system to coordinate anywhere from 10 to 40 or even more different kitchen users. Yeah, so that's the rundown of how we're going to talk about those different spaces today.
Thanks. So as we think about what it takes to include a shared use kitchen in a co-op project, we want to break it down into a couple of different pieces. It's going to be a use of space. It's going to be a use of staff capacity, and it's going to depend on partnerships. We know that from our experience that these three things are critical elements we need to think about when in terms of managing this kind of addition. And it's not to be taken lightly. These things all have impacts on the overall viability of both endeavors. And I think that's important to remember as we think about this.
Yeah, so to build on what we were talking about with the definitions of the different types, I'm going to go through most of those and talk about some of the space you should think about building in, X number of square feet if you want to do this type of kitchen. So um, if you are thinking you want an incubator kitchen in your building, you should plan on having at least two rentable kitchen areas. Actually, three or more is better. And two of those should be cooking or baking stations, like with hood and, hot equipment. Just for a little, um, walk down what Can-Do has done. When we had the kitchen at PFC where Chris worked, it was a 1,500 square feet and had two identical stations under one big hood. And then it had two identical dishwashing sinks. It had a shared walk-in cooler and freezer. So it was kind of like you could have two different businesses working in the space at the same time. We had such a successful anchor tenant, which was PFC's Dilley, that we all grew out of that space by 2014, which was just 4 years after we opened there. So um, it wasn't big enough. So that was just, we had to learn that by experience and figure that out. So Can-Do moved to a facility that then had 1,700 square feet, not very much bigger, really, if we think about it. um, but we again had two rentable stations and it had more storage than we did before. So that was a key. That's a key for business incubators, kitchen incubators, is that storage, because each client is going to have their own storage needs in terms of bringing your ingredients and your packaging supplies there. You make it, then you package it up, and you have to leave it there till you sell it. You can't take it home. Can-Do then moved to a facility now that has 2,500 square feet of kitchens. You can see a little bit of it behind me. That's our prep pod. We have three cooking pods, so there's three hoods, and they each have equipment under it, and then we have three prep or packaging pods. Now we have over 1,200 square feet of storage, and it's laid out a lot more effectively. So you can kind of see how when you think about an incubator actually getting to a sustainable size, that you really need to scale everything up, not just the kitchen, but the storage. Um, and just for a little context, it did cost Can-Do Kalamazoo around $150,000 to operate our incubator kitchen last year, and that did not include staff time. If you are thinking of a shared use kitchen, kind of minus all that business support, I would think you'd need at least 300 or 400 square feet for a space for one producer to use at a time. Most of those folks are going to need a hood, a range, and an oven, maybe a piece of specialty equipment. Um, a producer might want more space, and you could have it be a lot bigger if you wanted to, but you have to figure out what makes sense financially. You want to make sure you have the bare minimum, like 100 square feet of cold storage for one producer. For a teaching kitchen to accommodate a lot of people, students, you'd probably want to have at least 800 square feet, but more is better if you want to have a standalone student stations where everybody has their own spot, they stand and cook and all that. Also, you'd probably want to have a place for people to sit down together and eat what they prepared. We've found that when we do cooking classes here, people, that's what they want to do, is sit down, eat together. So thinking about tables and chairs or stools that you pull up to the work tables. But again, it totally depends on the number of students that you want to accommodate in a class, which also goes back to your financial model. We're going to keep going back to that this whole time. Kind of the same size, I would say, for a soup kitchen. I mean, you could get away with 300 to 400 square feet. You just want to make sure you have volume cooking equipment available under that hood. So like a 40-gallon tilt skillet or something that's going to allow you to cook a lot of one thing at one time. And depending on if you're going to have a bunch of volunteers in there helping out, you need to make sure you've got a lot of table space for them to help. You definitely want a walk-in cooler in a soup kitchen because you'll probably be taking produce donations or buying in bulk because you want to get that. You don't have a lot of money probably for this operation because you're not charging any money for it. Also ask yourself if you're going to serve the meals in this facility, which comes with some unique space needs, or whether you're going to take them to another site, which requires some hot holding and delivery stuff that's unique. And then I would say a production kitchen would need to be quite a bit bigger than any of these options, just because it's for someone that's actually established and has their own equipment and has a lot of ingredients coming in and finished product going out. So yeah, those are a couple of the considerations for square footage.
Yeah, so you can tell already that the programming matters so much, and it's just, all of the detail that it takes to run a grocery store. You're adding a whole new level of detail by adding on all of this, all of the complexity of a shared use kitchen of any sort, really. But to space specifically, whether, space isn't cheap. So whether you're building your own building or leasing space in someone else's building, square footage is expensive. For retail grocery, finding the right balance of retail and non-retail use for that square footage is critical to balance efficient operations with meeting the needs of the community in the way you set out to in your vision and your business plan. So dedicating some amount of space to a shared use kitchen can mean possibly limiting retail floor space, which is your primary income generator. So that's not one to take lightly, or limiting backroom space, the area used to give staff space to do their jobs and keep product flow and storage organized. Um, or adding on to the size of your project, which is expensive as well, or some combo of all three. So you can see that like that space matters, right? Because it's at a premium. So how you decide to go about adding a shared use kitchen, if that's what you want to do, can contribute really to meeting your vision in a way that contributes to business viability or make it harder. That's a possibility on both sides there. So talk a little bit about staff capacity.
Yeah, so staff for a business incubator anyway, staff are just one of our biggest expenses because it takes so much one-on-one work to work with businesses. But if you were going to do a teaching kitchen. Basically, what we've built out here is like you're gonna, for any kind of kitchen, you're gonna need certain things. And then as you add on a couple different types of kitchens, you need to add things on. So basically, your baseline kitchen would be like your teaching kitchen. You have to figure out who's gonna teach the class, who's gonna coordinate the registration. Is it gonna be do the marketing? Is it gonna be the co-op? Is it gonna be an outside organization or some combination of both? You'll need some staff time to schedule the classes in that kitchen. Someone has to coordinate the insurance, make sure that's in place. Someone has to order cleaning supplies and any other supplies you might need. Someone has to coordinate equipment maintenance, whether that's them doing it or calling in maintenance contractors. It does take time. And then that staff time to monitor that accountability to make sure if everybody's cleaning up, everybody's sticking to their schedule, all that stuff. So you've got kind of a baseline of staff there. Now, if you take the next level up to a production or a soup kitchen, you've got all those things that a staff has to do. Plus, you have to coordinate licensing, which, depending on how easy your local county or state is, with that can take quite a bit of time and know-how. Then you also need to have someone that can ensure that food safety standards are being followed. And depending on, well, I think ServSafe is required for every state nowadays here in Michigan. So you have to have someone that probably is ServSafe certified that knows what to look for and how to give feedback to kitchen users about what they should be doing for food safety. Now, if you want to go to that next level and do an incubator kitchen, you've got all that staff responsibility plus someone that needs to manage the client scheduling system. I saw someone mention the food corridor in the chat, and they are like we do use them for scheduling, and it's a good system, but it still takes someone to manage it and make sure it's all going according to plan. And then making sure that people that are actually in the kitchen are following the schedule they said they were going to rent. You need someone to manage some kind of use agreement or a contract so that the kitchen users understand like what's expected of them and what the kitchen's going to provide. Someone needs to make sure that the kitchen is clean between clients, whether that's doing the cleaning themselves or going in and making sure that previous client cleaned up. And of course, all the specialized business support and resources and client meetings. So, I mean, depending on what kind of, incubation programming you want to have, that will determine, your staff, how many staff hours you put towards that. For Can-Do Kalamazoo, we have a full-time kitchen manager, and then there are a lot of other positions that we have here that dedicate some of their weekly time towards our food business members. And I think it's probably around 80 staff hours per week for us to make sure that the kitchen being run well and that the clients get what they need and they're getting the support. So it's really something to think a lot about. It can be an afterthought, but you really should plan in your staffing according to what your goals are in your kitchen.
Yeah, a big thing that made it really viable for PFC Kalamazoo was having a partner like Can-Do Kalamazoo that was going to take on all of that additional staffing, right? We have had some challenges just to, work within that space, that shared use space together. But like all of this overhead of staff time, PFC did not manage any of that, and that was critical to our success in that project, I think. Um, we did coordinate some of our own cooking classes, which took staff time to do for sure. And that is not to be taken lightly. Just that little part is not to be taken lightly, right? It can be seen as a marketing expense and makes sense, but in order to make it really viable, you need to have be thinking through that. Because to remember, like staff time is your biggest expense after product cost when your store is up and running, right? So you'll have roughly 18 to 20 cents of every dollar that somebody spends at your store to pay your staff for everything, right? And it's challenging enough often to accomplish just the basics of grocery operations on those pennies. And so to add any additional duties is really should be done with caution. It can put your organization and situation um, at risk, and we don't want to do that, right? And when we back to space for a second, when we built the building, that was an additional 1,500 square feet of building that we had to build in order to be able to accommodate the kitchen. We built much more of a kitchen than we would have otherwise, and that was pre-COVID construction, which was way cheaper than it is now. I can't even tell you, like that's dollars per square foot is something that's it's really challenging to balance in these projects. So, all right. So partnerships. Um, so one way, like we're talking about, to allow for this to be part of a project in a sustainable way is to work closely with partners. Sometimes a partner, for example, a municipality might approach you with money or other incentives to build a shared use kitchen into your co-op development project. That's really, I think, part of what's bringing this to the fore for in these conversations lately is that there's kind of a trend or something that's happening out there in development. Um, and so, those dollars up front, you need to see those as an incentive for you to participate in something that will have long-term effects on the business. And that's really what we're talking about is what those effects will be long term. So what we found, what we'd been in partnership with Can-Do and other efforts of the parent nonprofit for a long time, really kind of originally growing out of the mission of the co-op and then getting legs of its own. But we were looking around and saying, like, who's already got doing some kind of work like this in the community? That's where you can be looking for those partners. Is there a program in existence that you can partner with or that wants to partner with you to take on some of this overhead, whether it's raising money to do the additional dollars that it will take to build out something like that, or to offset the staff time and so on. So um, that's kind of the basics of partnerships. So let's talk about a few examples, and we'll then spend some time on PFC and Can-Do specifically. But first, let me talk about Gem City Market down in Dayton. They had a partnership with a local hospital to put in a six-station teaching kitchen. And the idea was that local hospital would provide one day a week of part of programming, and the rest of the time that kitchen would be available. It is a beautiful neighborhood community asset in the building as part of the project. Events that happen in the kitchen, I can say firsthand, did bring traffic into the building and resulted in shopping. There were staff time costs, though. We were scheduling, we were cleaning, we were providing all the supplies, and over time, supplies like pots and pans and things disappear, and so who's going to be responsible for making sure that budget is taken care of? And again, we're talking about one penny for the most part at the as your bottom line when you're operating a grocery store. So any additional costs on top of that, on top of regular operating costs, can really erode away at that. And then the equipment maintenance too, just making sure that the hoods are cleaned and all of the equipment is operational. That takes effort, and those were real costs that were really impacting operations and still are, I'm sure, at Gem City. In Detroit, different model. So back in the case of Dayton, this hospital donated a bunch of money to build this out, and then operation landed on the co-op. In Detroit, different situation. There was definitely a broader community interest and movement that the co-op grew out of, which was part of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network's work with urban growers and so on in the community. Definitely built this beautiful building. I think it's a 50, 30,000 square foot building or something like that between both floors. And the second floor is where DBC FSN operates out of, and so that, a beautiful asset to the community in terms of huge kitchen space. Events do bring traffic into the store. There is a very strong partnership. And often I would see kitchen users in the store buying from DPFC to like supplement whatever Gordon Food Service stuff that they'd gotten or something like that. Specialty ingredients, things like that might come from the co-op, which was beneficial. Um, there was some confusion. That was the big cost in Detroit. Some confusion about who operated the kitchens and so on. So we had to have some dedicated time to just talk people through that and make sure that they got the contact information they needed, but not a terribly onerous situation. Largely, it was out of the co-op's hands. In Kalamazoo, at our store, we again, for us, this was progression of work that we were already doing together in the community, around building the local food system, working with growers. We both, as organizations, had our strengths that we could contribute to the situation. So we were a retailer. We were excited to have products made right in the building. We were calling those hyper local, right? So like how many, instead of how many miles to travel to get to the shelf, it was like how many feet to travel to get to the shelf. It was super fun that way, to feature those products. And definitely cooking classes and other events would bring traffic into the store. And then, I think that it did contribute to the community and the neighborhood in a positive way. It takes time, the costs for PFC in terms of, time to navigate the shared use spaces, which was mostly just um, Lucy and her team and me and my team having to, chat once in a while to make sure that we were on the same page about kitchen time and kitchen use. In that case, it was a wide open kitchen space and two bays that PFC basically operated out of one of those bays. Um, at least to start theoretically 96 hours a week, but it turned into like basically use that bay. And then that really compromised um, the ability for both of us to grow really. And I think especially probably had an impact on Can-Do's possibilities just because we were soaking up that one spot all of the time. And they really had limited ability to lease out their kitchen space. So. Lucy, what would you add to the Can-Do PFC?
I think it was like for Can-Do Kitchen at that time, it was a really good move for us because we were just totally small, totally grassroots. I didn't have the know-how or the capacity to do any major fundraising, so it really helped Can-Do to co-locate in the co-op's building. And we also got a lot of good visibility from being there because people would walk right by our door and come in and ask us what we were doing. And I think people still walk into the co-op and wonder, I don't know, we still get people calling us thinking we're part of the co-op. So there is a little bit of confusion that has persisted a little bit. Um, I think that, it what we were trying to do was get more local food on the grocery store shelves. So it was really powerful and direct way to work with a small retailer to do that. And because we knew each other, we could connect right to their grocery buyer and be like, all right, here's a meeting, have these things ready, and they might choose your product to be on their shelf. And how easy is that? Just to, literally be in the same building you produced it. So that was really impactful for the small producers we were working with at that time. Um, And it was really interesting to have, like I mentioned earlier, that anchor tenant model. In hindsight, the anchor tenant really needed its own kitchen space. It really was, I guess you could think about it like, we could have, who could have, would have, should have, but um, the deli needed their own space. I mean, they had a whole team, they all worked together and they had a whole thing. And with our people, it was like different people coming in, a couple times a day. And I would imagine it was weird for the co-op team to have to, contend with the unique people coming in, through Can-Do on that side of the room. I mean, it was just a really interesting experiment that I'm glad we did. And I think that the way that we ended up parting ways, I think was also good for both organizations.
I think there was licensing challenges too and confusion. A lot of the time we had to really teach our local ag department licensure and then or licensing agents and the county so that the grocery store doesn't need to be licensed by the county, but some folks within that were users of the Can-Do side were did need to be licensed that way. So there was just a lot of complexity to licensing. Which, because we had a dedicated partner in Can-Do, they really largely handled all that. We just dealt with the ag side, and they really got to dig in and knew what was needed that they needed to know in order to be able to keep that all straight and keep everybody aligned and going in the same direction. But I think it took some time to educate them, years really, to educate them about how they needed to, meaning the licensing folks, how they needed to think about us. So yeah, it was a lot of a learning curve and I do think it was successful full overall. It's important to note that it was like, it was still really only 4 years, like Lucy said, once, of all of that time and energy and effort put into it before we had to we realized, well, this is no longer really a fit that serves us both long term. So and what it would have taken if you were listening to Lucy's part about how much space these things take, it really would have taken a much bigger building and a much bigger project, right? Which is, again, an investment that's not cheap. But on our side, on the PFC side, we wouldn't have built as big of a kitchen as we did and wouldn't have been able to outfit it as completely and as thoroughly as Can-Do was able to do. Um, and then the negative side of that today is that, we have a quarter of our building dedicated to of that store, a quarter of that building is dedicated to kitchen, that is not retail, right? Space that you can leverage into sales by having extra retail space, right? And that's, it's an impact long term that I think again was still worth it overall, but that has a real impact on the viability of the business going forward. So I think at this point unless Lucy had anything to add, I think we're opening it up.
Your questions.
All right. Well, we had a specific space use question, which I will get back to, I promise. But I'm going to ask you guys a question or two because I noticed some things when you guys said this. I was like, oh my goodness. So this is a startup kind of edge question is, so I noticed that DPOC had a partner, Detroit PLC had a partner that paid to build that part of the building, the kitchen. Gem City got grants, but the co-op had to do it. Had to like, so it was funded, but they had to build it themselves. With PFC, was there grant funding or was the co-op just able to fund that themselves? And would you do it the same if you did it again?
Well, so our stack definitely did not have any grant funding in it. The We took out debt largely, and I don't think we could afford to do that again. I don't think I would advocate to do it that way again. But again, there were dollars being provided through grants through Can-Do because Can-Do had the ability to raise money that way.
Great. People feel free to throw your questions in the chat. And one person has been messaging me directly. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but you can message me directly if you don't want it to be publicly seen. I'm gonna go with that question first, and then I'm gonna go back to Vicky's. They're like, oh, Lucy, it sounds like you know what you're doing, though. Can you talk about working with a nonprofit and what we should be looking for to make sure they make a good partner for this? Good question. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Um, I guess you should do your research and really talk to a lot of people in your community. You might get to people in different ways than you think, just people that are doing business support. They know how to do business support. Um, food in particular. I mean, it's easy for me to say this now. I'm like, find someone that has a track record. Well, I didn't have a track record before I started, so um, easier said than done. But I think that if you can kind of vet, your partners and find out who does have a track record for helping food businesses and how they if they can describe a structure or kind of a yeah, kind of a plan. Like how we walk. Here's what we do for a food business. Here's how we walk them through the steps. And I think that you should at least ask that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I know that we've had some food co-ops that have had shared use kitchens that they did rent them out to a nonprofit that was managing it, but they had no experience with it, and there have been challenges. So that's good advice. Vicky did ask, um, like she and I want to put her question out, but then I want to kind of frame it a little bit. So she was looking to accommodate 25 participants in a teaching kitchen. What is the recommended square feet for including fridge space and communal eating? I'm going to back that up to if you're a startup and you're figuring out your purpose for your kitchen and what you want to accomplish, how are you going to figure stuff like that out? How much space you're going to need to do what you need to do? Um, so that there's that specific question, and then just in general, like where would you take those questions if you're going to start to think this through? Like you're going to pick your purpose and you're going to start modeling this as a co-op.
Is that a
Um,
question for us?
yeah.
For either of you.
Okay.
Do you have
I
some thoughts on that,
I
Lucy?
have one thought. Yeah, I mean, I would work, I would seek out a like a consultant that
Yeah.
has helped build out these kind of spaces. And one that we worked with called New Venture Advisors in Chicago, it was good to work with. And they helped us put together a plan that took our building's purpose into account and attached financial outcomes to the building space, the kitchen space. It was called New Venture Advisors. I mean, they wouldn't, I don't know if they build co-ops, but they do different types of kitchens kind of ventures.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that you're merging these two different uses, right? And it is challenging enough to be an expert and build your capacity to understand what's really needed on the grocery side. So adding in this other complexity, you really do need that specialized knowledge. And we were just because we were in partnership with Can-Do already, we had a shared vision for how we wanted to move this forward. But navigating all of those challenges of like, how's this going to look? How is it going to work? Who has what with responsibility? Um, that just takes a lot of time and attention and dedication.
We're getting several questions about different levels of risk. We're going to start with Heather's, I think is aimed at you, Chris. Can you talk a bit more about the risk factors in general of just hitching your wagon or kitchen space to an outside organization?
Right. Yeah, so you can tell by the progress that Lucy's made with Can-Do Kalamazoo that she and they were in it for the long haul and in it to win it, right? Um, and that was a real benefit. There was a real synergy there for the time we were together, and it was a real benefit to be in this project together. We got a lot of visibility because of that, and it really did contribute to this sense of like we are collectively building the local food system and there's energy around that. I could imagine, though, a lot of situations where you don't have that sort of like understood or really shared vision together. And then you have the potential for building out a space with a partner that doesn't know what they're doing or doesn't have the ability to execute. And then you've got your real asset of this building in this space tied up in a unrealized or an unrealizable part of the vision, and that's definitely concerning.
I think either of you could answer this one. I'm thinking a little more. I want to aim this one toward Lucy. Um, are you worried right now about front funding for projects like this, drying up during, this exact time period that it's mission-driven shared use kitchens? Our co-op's considering it, but we're worried the grant funding might disappear.
Yeah, I'm a little worried. I can't, I think it Of course, it all depends on where the funding's coming from, right? But I think it's probably smart to be conservative at this moment about developing something that might require a lot of grant funding in the future. Yeah,
Chris,
I
did you want
can't
to add
predict.
anything to that?
Nothing to add to that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think we're all like, we don't know exactly the answer other than yes, we should all be concerned. That it being grant dependent. It's a tough moment. There are some questions about, and I want to go, I'm going to focus a little more on the co-op stuff. So I have a couple, one person is instant messaging me. Good questions there. So they're like, so what did you do with the kitchen when Can-Do Kalamazoo left? Is it working for you guys?
Um, well, we immediately went to work using the whole kitchen in Kalamazoo to do more, expand on our deli programming. We were able then to do more baked goods and more variety and products in the space that we had. And we also, what was interesting, I think, is we also experienced like I said, we had a little more space dedicated to that than we really needed. And so we ended up partnering with some nonprofit or some efforts in Kalamazoo doing like soup kitchen kind of, food not bombs partnership kind of stuff. We actually ended up in a step-up relationship with one local producer who we wanted their product in the store, and they weren't quite ready for Can-Do's, more intensive incubation. So we co-created this step-up program that gave that person access to both time in our kitchen, so we could get that product on the shelf, and also sort of basic incubation support. So, and they did pay for time in the kitchen, and we just sent that cost right on to, or those money right on to, I think they just paid Can-Do for that,
Okay.
as I
That was
recall.
awesome. Thank you.
Well, yeah, it was great that they got to this product still in the store, I think, and that was a big addition. So that was helpful. And then cooking classes, we definitely it allowed us to have the space to really invest in that. And man, we got some solid traction right before COVID with that, and it just quashed it. And so then there really hasn't been the same sort of like time and energy. This is what it comes down to, really. Like any of that additional stuff took staff time and energy. So the minute that it stopped, we couldn't afford that time and energy to be dedicated that way, those sort of uses taper off or lose traction, because the grocery side is so intensive in terms of staff time.
I'm gonna point out, Jennifer, to your question. So at Gem City and at Detroit People's Food Co-op, this is not the kitchen that is being used by the actual deli staff of the co-op.
Right.
But the question was at PFC, was this one large kitchen space that everyone was using? Were there multiple kitchens? Like, how did that work?
There
Yep.
was one kitchen that had a 20-foot hood, and under that hood was a stove and an oven, and then an oven and a stove, and then there were tables. So it was not divided into separate rooms.
Okay.
And on the back side of that, there was the dish pit, one for each side as well.
Right.
Yeah, and one of the challenges we did see with the shared use part while we were both doing that was just cleanliness, like who's keeping, just holding each other accountable for the cleanliness level needed by both operations. And I'm going to say that was probably a lot more challenging for Lucy to have multiple users in there, and having to hold them accountable to that standard. And um, although, anybody who's managed a kitchen or managed kitchen staff knows that you've also got to keep on them to keep those standards high as well. So,
Yeah. There was a question about, and I'm just going to pretty much answer, Alan. I don't think, I'm almost certain no one was doing organic certified production on these kitchens. But in general, the whole, USDA, FDA facilities, and just following HACCP and certification if people were reselling. Maybe speak to HACCP for a minute, what that is, and if it was involved with your kitchens or your kitchen projects.
Yeah, I mean, The Can-Do kitchen was low acid certified, so somebody could, I'm sorry, nope, acidified. I'm sorry. So we could have producers in there that had produced a shelf stable product that they added acid to the point to get it to the right pH. Um, it's such a onerous process that didn't happen very often. We couldn't do we couldn't be USDA certified because it was the shared use. We couldn't have people actually inoculating milk to make cheese or yogurt because of the things that go in the air. Um, and yeah, we just decided, this is the Can-Do Kitchen is a kitchen for startups and young businesses. The minute they need a gluten-free facility or they need their, a place to do intense inoculation, that's the graduation step. So that's at that point we say, cool, let's let's find you another facility so you can live into your big goals. I forgot what your original question was though.
I think you hit it. That was, if anyone doesn't know what the term HACCP means, that's just another, intensive certification and standards process you have to go through to package food as well. This one's a great, I think we don't have time. We have time for 1 to 2 more questions. So this may be our wrap question, or we might have time for one more, but this is a great one. Just, I'm going to throw this at you, Chris, which is, does this work as a revenue model? Renting out a kitchen, is this worth the hassle to have this as a revenue model as part of your food co-op?
No. I can talk a little bit more about that. And I mean, certainly having a partner who was doing that, part of it was what really made it work. And we did have a joint, like Can-Do paid rent to PFC for that 1,500 square feet of space. PFC in turn paid a use fee to Can-Do. So there was some of this, there was mutual support based on the use of the space. But I mean, for PFC, that never would have been worth the hassle of actually doing the revenue model of renting kitchen space. Now I'll say, Lucy, is it worth it? I mean, you've spent a lot of time not really having the rent that's needed, right, in order to keep things at the level they need to be. That's not exactly how I should have framed that
Mhm.
question. What I mean is you've offset some of those costs with
Oh,
grants and so on.
yeah.
You don't have that just directly coming in as cash.
No, yeah, I mean, we intentionally price all our programs and our rent low so people can use them, and then we we bring in grants and donations to help us actually operate our programs. And bringing in grants and donations is not easy. It's not there's no such thing as free money. People time and goes into that. So it's just our business model really to have program fees, grants, donations, etc.
I'm really glad the question came up because understandably, as we're all building these new kinds of businesses we've never built before, we're like, oh, we'll have this shared use kitchen, and that'll be part of our revenue model for our food co-op. Like that'll contribute. And I think where you can hear from what both Chris and Lucia said is that it will absolutely contribute to your mission, but it will be something you will struggle to keep, you will need outside support to keep financially sustainable, if I'm hearing you correctly. Any last thoughts either of you just really want to share with startups who are considering trying to actually have a shared use kitchen?
Just seek out people that are doing these things in your communities already. I can't say that enough.
Yeah, and just be thinking through what the impacts will be on the day-to-day grocery experience as well, because that's really ultimately what we're there to execute on a mission, and depending on how important the shared use kitchen part of that might be, it can really have an impact on your day-to-day grocery.
All right. Well, I want to thank Chris and Lucy so much for being here. And finally, we had some experts to bring in to talk about this question that so many of you have wanted to talk about. We really appreciate it. So just a quick minute to thank them. Please do take the 2-minute survey. We just emailed it to you. If you registered for this, it's in your email box. It's 2 minutes long, and if you fill it out, it helps us make better content and it helps us also keep this content free. So we really appreciate it. And just want to make sure you know we still have one more session coming up today in the FCI Live series, Lessons from the First 2 Years with Sam McCormick, the general manager of the Aspect Co-op Market. It's a startup food co-op that opened 2 years ago in Maynard, Massachusetts that is very successful. And we're going to learn from Sam what they wish they had known and some of the big takeaways of opening a food co-op and what you're going to want to know about what it's going to be like after it opens. And then tomorrow, one again, highly requested, the other side of grants. This is a peer panel. We love these peer panels with other startup food cooperators. These always get really high marks. We're going to have a facilitated panel with Bethlehem Co-op Market, Chicago Market, Prairie Food Co-op, and Suncoast Market, all of whom have been very successful at getting grant awards and are now dealing with the other side of getting that grant funding. And we're new in startup food co-op movement to accessing such large grants. And so it's kind of new information, what it's like to deal with them and to be prepared to work with them after the announcement of the award. And we actually get to needing to get our hands on that cash and spend it and report on it and so forth. And they're going to talk about that. And you can find out more about all the sessions we have coming up this week and next week. This is a 2-week series at our website. It's just fci.coop. It's /FCI Live. And one last big thank you. We had a record number of sponsors come out for FCI Live 2025 this year, making this possible. We are so grateful to them for their belief in the series, but for their belief in the startup food co-op movement. They make it possible. Thanks so much to them.